On a cold winter evening in December of 1935. The city of New York shimmered beneath a veil of fog and electric light, automobiles whispered through wet streets, and somewhere high above the restless avenues of Manhattan, a billionaire sat alone inside a locked room, waiting for something no one else could see. His name was Benjamin Collier, a man whose fortune had risen from railroads, steel, and oil, until newspapers called him one of the richest men in America. Yet despite his immense wealth, despite the towering penthouse he owned above the city skyline, Benjamin Collier lived like a ghost inside his own empire. Servants rarely saw him, business partners described him as distracted and distant, and for months, strange rumors drifted through Manhattan society, whispers of midnight conversations behind locked doors, of letters burned before sunrise, of shadows moving behind curtained windows on the 33rd floor. Then, one silent morning, his valet climbed the staircase carrying breakfast, knocked gently upon the study door, and received no answer at all. The room was locked from the inside, every window sealed, every curtain drawn against the pale December dawn. At first, the servants assumed their employer had simply fallen asleep beside the fire, but as the hours passed, unease spread through the penthouse like cold water through stone. Finally, with trembling hands, the butler forced the heavy oak door open. What waited inside would become one of the strangest mysteries in American history. The fireplace still crackled softly, a cup of tea rested warm beside an armchair, and Benjamin Collier himself had vanished completely. No footprints marked the snow beyond the balcony, no hidden passage could be found within the walls, and the only sound remaining in the room was the faint ticking of a golden pocket watch left upon the desk. Still counting the seconds after its owner had disappeared. Police flooded the penthouse within the hour, reporters crowded the streets below, and soon the newspapers carried a question that no detective could answer. How could a man simply vanish from a locked room in the center of New York City? As investigators searched deeper into Collier's private life, they uncovered fragments of a story far darker than anyone imagined: secret financial transfers, coded diary entries, and one chilling message scribbled upon a scrap of paper hidden beneath the desk blotter, a message that read only, "He finally found me." But who was he? And why had one of the most powerful men in America spent his final months living in fear? Those questions would pull detectives through hidden corridors of wealth, betrayal, and obsession, leading toward truths buried beneath the glittering heart of the 1930s. And as tonight's mystery slowly unfolds here on Immersive Tales, you may find yourself drifting deeper into the shadows alongside them. So if you enjoy these quiet journeys into history and the unknown, gently subscribe to Immersive Tales, and settle in comfortably, because in the next part, we will step beyond the locked door, and uncover the first terrifying clue Benjamin Collier left behind. Detective Arthur Bellamy arrived at the penthouse just after sunrise, his long coat still damp from the drifting winter rain below. Bellamy was not the kind of man newspapers celebrated. He spoke softly, walked slowly, and carried the tired eyes of someone who had spent too many years staring into the darker corners of human nature. As he entered Benjamin Collier's study, he paused for a long moment beside the doorway, listening carefully to the silence inside the room. The air smelled faintly of cigar smoke, melted candle wax, and something else beneath it all. A strange metallic scent that no one else seemed to notice. Around him, policemen moved nervously between shelves of books and polished furniture, yet Bellamy's attention settled only on the small details others ignored. A chair positioned slightly away from the desk, ashes scattered unevenly across the fireplace stones. And deep scratches carved into the wooden floor beside the window, as though something heavy had been dragged across the room during the night. Outside the penthouse, Manhattan awakened beneath gray skies and falling snow, but inside Collier's private study, time itself felt strangely suspended. Bellamy examined the locked windows one by one, each secured firmly from within, each impossible to escape through without leaving a trace. Then, quietly, he approached the desk where the golden pocket watch continued its endless ticking. The detective lifted it carefully into his gloved hand, and noticed at once that the watch had stopped for exactly 3 minutes sometime earlier that night before beginning again on its own. It was impossible. Yet there it was, undeniable beneath the pale morning light. Nearby, hidden beneath stacks of business papers, Bellamy uncovered a leather journal filled with cryptic entries written in Collier's own hand. Most pages contained meaningless fragments, names repeated again and again, times, locations, unfinished thoughts. But one sentence appeared so often it seemed to haunt the very paper itself. "The room is never truly empty." As Bellamy read those words, a quiet chill passed through him, because despite the crowded penthouse, despite the officers surrounding him, he suddenly felt the unmistakable sensation that someone else was standing nearby, watching silently from just beyond his sight. That evening, Bellamy ordered the entire study sealed until further notice, but before leaving, he made one final discovery hidden inside the fireplace ashes. There, buried beneath burned letters and blackened paper, rested the torn corner of a photograph. Only part of the image survived the flames, yet it clearly showed Benjamin Collier standing beside another man whose face had been carefully cut away with scissors. On the back, written in fading ink, were the words, "Black Hollow Estate, October 1926. Bellamy stared at the photograph for a long while as snow drifted quietly against the penthouse windows, because he recognized the name immediately. Black Hollow Estate had once belonged to a wealthy family in upstate New York. Abandoned for years after a series of unexplained deaths whispered about only in old newspapers and frightened local legends. And somehow, Benjamin Collier's disappearance was connected to that forgotten place. In the next part, the detective will travel far beyond the lights of Manhattan, toward a decaying estate where the silence hides something waiting patiently in the dark. 2 nights later, Detective Arthur Bellamy boarded a slow northbound train leaving the noise of Manhattan behind. The city lights gradually faded into darkness, replaced by frozen rivers, silent forests, and lonely towns sleeping beneath heavy snow. Bellamy sat alone beside the window of the nearly empty carriage, the torn photograph resting carefully inside his coat pocket while the rhythmic clatter of the train echoed softly through the night. As miles passed beneath the wheels, he read through Benjamin Collier's journal once more beneath the dim yellow lamp overhead. Certain passages now seemed stranger than before, descriptions of whispered footsteps in empty hallways, of locked doors opening by themselves after midnight, of a man Collier referred to only as the visitor. Again and again, the billionaire wrote about Black Hollow Estate as though the place itself were alive, watching him, waiting for his return. Near the back of the journal, Bellamy discovered one final entry dated only 3 days before the disappearance. The handwriting shook violently across the page. "If he reaches New York, the room will not protect me anymore. By dawn, The train arrived near the isolated hills of upstate New York, where winter fog drifted low across the countryside like pale smoke. A driver from the small nearby village reluctantly agreed to take Bellamy the remaining miles toward Black Hollow Estate. Though the old man spoke little during the journey. The deeper they traveled into the woods, the quieter the world became. Snow covered the road in thick untouched layers, tree branches bent heavily in the cold, and even the birds seemed absent from the frozen landscape. Then at last, beyond a rusted iron gate, Bellamy saw the estate emerge through the fog. The mansion stood enormous and decaying atop a lonely hill, its black windows staring outward like hollow eyes. Parts of the roof had collapsed years earlier, vines twisted across cracked stone walls, and yet despite decades of abandonment, faint smoke still drifted upward from one of the chimneys. Bellamy stepped slowly from the car, his boots sinking into fresh snow, while somewhere deep inside the estate, a single door creaked open all by itself. The villagers had warned him not to enter after dark, but as evening settled across the hills, Bellamy crossed the frozen courtyard and pushed open the massive front doors. Inside, the mansion smelled of dust, wet wood, and extinguished candles. His flashlight moved slowly across portraits hanging crooked along the walls, faces faded with age, eyes almost seeming to follow him through the darkness. Then, near the grand staircase, Bellamy noticed something that stopped him cold. Fresh footprints marked the dusty floor ahead of him, recent footprints, leading deeper into the mansion's shadowed halls. They were not Collier's, nor the boots of any villager. These prints were unusually long and narrow, almost unnatural in shape, and beside them, scratched directly into the wood floorboards, appeared the same words found in Collier's journal. "The room is never truly empty." Bellamy's breathing slowed as the distant sound of footsteps echoed somewhere above him, soft, deliberate, patient. And in the next part, the detective will finally discover what Benjamin Collier encountered inside Black Hollow Estate nearly 10 years earlier, the secret that followed him all the way back to New York, and perhaps, into the locked room itself. Detective Arthur Bellamy stood motionless beneath the towering staircase of Black Hollow Estate, listening carefully as the footsteps above him continued at a slow and measured pace. One step, then silence, another step, then silence once more. The sound drifted across the upper corridors like the faint echo of someone wandering endlessly through the mansion at night. Bellamy tightened his grip on the flashlight and began climbing the staircase, each wooden step groaning softly beneath his weight. Dust floated through the cold air, disturbed only by his movement, while long curtains swayed gently despite the stillness of the house. Upstairs, the hallways stretched endlessly into shadow, lined with closed doors and faded portraits darkened by age. And there, at the very end of the corridor, Bellamy noticed a pale light flickering beneath one particular door, warm candlelight glowing softly against the floorboards, as though someone inside had been waiting quietly for his arrival. The room beyond had once been a private library, though years of neglect had transformed it into something far stranger. Books lay scattered across the floor. Shelves leaned crooked against cracked walls, and dozens of candles burned low around a large wooden table at the center of the chamber. Bellamy moved slowly through the silence until his flashlight settled upon a collection of old newspapers carefully stacked beside the fireplace. Their dates all matched the autumn of 1926. The same year written upon the torn photograph found in Benjamin Collier's penthouse. One by one, Bellamy unfolded the brittle pages and began reading. The articles described a gathering held at Black Hollow Estate by its former owner, Edgar Vail, a wealthy recluse fascinated by spiritualism, secret societies, and the possibility of life beyond death. According to the reports, several guests vanished during a private midnight séance held inside the mansion, while others fled claiming they heard voices speaking from empty walls. The estate was abandoned shortly afterward following the unexplained death of Edgar Vail himself, whose body had reportedly been discovered inside a locked room with an expression of absolute terror frozen upon his face. And among the surviving guests listed in the article, Bellamy found one familiar name, a young financier named Benjamin Collier. As the detective lowered the newspaper, the candle flames around the room suddenly flickered violently, though no wind entered the chamber. Then came the sound again, footsteps moving slowly somewhere behind him. Bellamy turned sharply. But the doorway stood empty. Only silence remained, heavy and watchful. Yet upon the dusty surface of the wooden table, something new had appeared while his back was turned. A single sheet of paper rested there now, yellowed with age, its edges trembling slightly beside the candlelight. Bellamy stepped closer and carefully unfolded it. What he saw caused the color to drain from his face. It was a guest list from the séance held in 1926. But beside every name, one by one, small black marks had been drawn through the dead. All except two. Benjamin Collier's name remained untouched, and beneath it, freshly written in dark wet ink, appeared another name that had not been there moments earlier. Arthur Bellamy. Somewhere deep within the mansion, a door slammed shut with terrible force, and from far below the house, a low voice whispered softly through the darkness. The room remembers. For several long moments, Detective Arthur Bellamy could not move. The paper trembled faintly in his hands while the candle flames around the library stretched thin and pale, as though the room itself had inhaled deeply and refused to breathe again. Somewhere below the mansion, the heavy door that had slammed shut continued to echo through the corridors, fading slowly into silence. Bellamy forced himself to look once more at the wet ink beside his own name. It glistened fresh upon the page, impossible to explain, impossible to ignore. Then, quietly, another sound drifted through the library. Not footsteps this time, but the faint crackling hum of an old phonograph beginning to play somewhere nearby. The detective turned toward the far corner of the room where an antique record player sat covered in dust beside the wall. Its brass horn tilted upward toward the ceiling, and though no hand touched it, the machine had begun spinning slowly on its own, through layers of static. A man's trembling voice emerged from the recording, weak, frightened, unmistakably belonging to Benjamin Collier. "If anyone finds this," the voice whispered softly between bursts of static, "leave this place before nightfall. He does not stay in the room stays inside him." Bellamy listened in silence as the recording continued, each sentence sounding more desperate than the last. Collier described the séance at Black Hollow Estate nearly 10 years earlier. How Edgar Vail had promised his guests a glimpse beyond death itself. How the candles extinguished one by one during the ritual, and how something unseen had answered them from the darkness. At first, the guests believed it was part of the performance, until the knocking began inside the walls. Slow, deliberate knocks, moving through the mansion as though something trapped behind the stone was searching for a way out. Then came the final confession hidden within the static hiss of the recording. Benjamin Collier admitted that after fleeing the estate in terror, he was never truly alone again. He claimed he began hearing footsteps in empty rooms, whispers behind locked doors, breathing beside his bed at night. "It follows whoever leaves the seance alive," Collier murmured weakly. "And once it learns your name, it waits patiently until you invite it inside." The phonograph suddenly stopped spinning. Silence swallowed the room once more, thick and suffocating. Then Bellamy noticed something impossible. The fresh footprints in the dust, the strange narrow ones he had followed upstairs earlier, had multiplied. They now covered the library floor entirely, circling slowly around him in endless overlapping patterns. Some appeared fresh, others faded decades old, yet all led toward a small hidden door partially concealed behind one of the towering bookshelves. Bellamy approached carefully, his heartbeat slow and heavy in the silence, and pressed against the wooden panel until it creaked open. Beyond lay a narrow stone staircase descending deep beneath the mansion, far below the visible foundation of the house itself. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness carrying the faint scent of damp earth, melted wax, and something else older still, something that felt strangely alive. And as Bellamy shined his flashlight downward, he saw words carved carefully into the stone wall beside the staircase. Words repeated over and over by countless trembling hands across many years. "Do not enter the second room.